let's continue reading Captain Underpants and the Big Bad Battle of the Bionic Booger Boy, Part 2. We are up to Chapter 10, Mean Mr Melvin. The next day, Mr Melvin was putting the finishing touches on his time machine when he heard cries of laughter out in the hallway. He opened the library door and saw a group of third graders happily reading George and Harold's newest comic book. Mr Melvin stomped down the hall, grabbed the comic out of their hands, and gasped in horror. "What the?" he screamed as he glared at the comic book's cover. Chapter 11, Captain Underpants and the War of the Willy Wonder Nerd. Doi da! By George Beard and Harold Hutchins. Oh no. Captain Underpants and the War of the Wily Wonder Nerd. A gripping tale of action and horror by George Beard and Harold Hutchins. Once upon a time there was a nuclear power plant. It had lots of waste. Nuclear waste removal. The waste was supposed to be taken to a dump, but one barrel fell off. The barrel rolled down a hill and landed in a cotton field. Glug, glug, glug. Soon the cotton soaked up the nuclear waste and began to grow. Then one time the cotton got harvested. "This cotton ball sure feels heavy." "Yeah, it's big too." And they took it to the underwear factory, Bub's Underwear Factory. Time was Tim's Cotton. All right. The cotton got made into underwear. "Hey, it's glowing." Soon, "Look, Melvin, there's a sale on glow-in-the-dark underwear." "Da, me want some, mummy, da." Soon, Melvin had his very own pair. "Now you're the coolest kid ever." "Da, I sure am." But that night, the radioactive underwear made him grow. And grow, and grow. Melvin's house crash. The next morning, Melvin woke up. Yawn, crash. So he walked to school. "Da, I'm a grumpy, boom, boom." "Sir, a giant nerd is attacking the city. Call the army and stuff." And soon the army and stuff arrived. Then there was a big war. I'm telling. Wonder Nerd picked up a tank and threw it. Meanwhile, at a nearby school, "You guys are pathetic. You're worthless and weak." Crash. "Help! Wonder Nerd just threw a tank and squashed somebody." "Oh no! Who was it?" "The gym teacher." "Oh, thank goodness. I thought it was somebody important." "This looks like a job for Captain Underpants." Zoom. "Hey, Wonder Nerd, quit it." "I'm not a nerd, I'm cool. My mummy said so." Captain Underpants flew around and saw a tag on Wonder Nerd's undies. "Warning, this underwear may shrink when washed." Thought Captain Underpants. "Aha! I've got you. Okay, do whatever you want, but please don't dunk me in the lake." "Huh? You can kill me, but please don't dunk me in the lake. I pray it." "Oh yeah? Well, maybe I will dunk you in the lake." "Oh, heavens no. I'll show you. No way." "Ha ha ha, get ready." "Ha. Hey, what the?" "Ah! My underpanties got wet. It's shrinking." "Oh no. Here, birdie, birdie." Psst, psh. You popped him like a balloon. Poor old Wonder Nerd. Bzzz. Hooray for Captain Underpants. Wah! It's off to nerd jail for you. Tra-la-la. Jame for dumb... What? Dumb, stupid nerds. Moral, always buy pre-shrunk underwears. Treehouse Comic Books. Chapter 12. Mad Mr Melvin. Mr Melvin was furious. He marched into the office and turned on the school intercom. "George Beard and Harold Hutchins," he shouted over the loudspeakers. loudspeakers. Meet Mr. Krupp in the school library right now. We have a library, said George. After about 20 minutes of searching, George and Harold finally came across a room they had never seen before. They entered cautiously, stepping quietly past rows and rows of empty bookshelves until they met up with Mr. Melvin. "I told you guys to give me a cool name and not make me look stupid," Mr. Melvin screamed, clutching their comic book in his sweaty hands. "Oops," said George. "I thought you said to give you a stupid name and not make you look cool." "Yeah," said Harold. "It was an honest misunderstanding." Mr. Melvin threw the comic book to the ground, then led George and Harold over to the purple potty. "Remember when I had that great idea to build a time machine?" asked Mr. Melvin. "Actually," said George, "that was mine." "Well, here it is," said Mr. Melvin, interrupted triumphantly. "And you two smarty pantsers are going to test it out for me." "Huh?" said Harold. "I'm sending you kids back in time to the day before yesterday," Mr. Melvin said, "and you better not return until you've got my Combinatron 2000. "Cool," said George. "I've always wanted to travel through time." Mr. Melvin had a great deal of instructions for George and Harold before they left on their journey, and though the instructions were quite boring, it would have benefited the boys if they'd paid attention instead of switching the letters around on the nearby bulletin board. Check out our school's big internet website at www.jhes.com. Mr. Melvin spoke at length about the workings of the time machine and the proper etiquette of time travel. "You must be very careful that nobody sees you on your journey," Mr. Melvin said. "If they do, just zap them with my new invention, the Forgetchamacallit 2000. This will erase everything in their short-term memory. They won't remember ever seeing you." Mr. Melvin had also built a fake Combinatron 2000 to switch with the real one. Finally, Mr. Melvin gave George and Harold a very important warning. "Whatever you do, it is very important that you don't use this time machine 2 days in a row. It needs to cool off every other day, or else it might open up an opposodimensional reality rift that could destroy the entire planet." That sounds dangerous. George and Harold started laughing at their new message on the bulletin board. We shake our big butts when we swim in the toilet." George, "Hey," Mr. Melvin shouted, "have you kids even ever heard one word I've said?" Yeah, said George. "We got to switch the thing with the thingy. And if somebody sees us," said Harold, "we'll zap them with the whatchamajiggy." "Don't worry, we got it," said George. George and Harold stepped into the purple potty as Mr. Melvin closed the door behind them. Harold set the controller for the day before yesterday, then George pulled the chain. Suddenly there was a brilliant flash of green light and the purple potty disappeared. Chapter 13. The Day Before Yesterday. After a few moments of flashing lights, everything became quiet. Harold opened the potty door and peeked out into the darkened library. Cautiously, the two time travellers stepped into the library window and looked out. There they saw Melvin's father, Mr. Sneedley, zapping the Bionic Booger Boy with a blast from the Combinatron 2000. "Been there," said George. "Done that," said Harold. In the corner, George and Harold found a coat and hat which belonged to Miss Singerbrains. Immediately they thought of a plan. Harold put on the coat and hat and climbed onto George's shoulders. "I'm sure hope this disguise works," said Harold. "It better," said George. "We can't risk letting them recognise us." Soon, George and Harold were at the scene of the action. Mr. Sneedley had just fired the Combinatron 2000 a second time, and now the boys were ready to make their move. Excuse me, Mr. Sneedley," said Harold, trying very hard to sound like a grown-up. "I'd like to present unto you the most brilliantest scientist guy in the whole wide world award." "Really?" cried Mr. Sneedley. It's always been my dream to win that award. "But first," said Harold, "I'd like to have a look at the Combino thingy." "Well," said Mr. Sneedley. He handed Harold the Combinatron 2000 and smiled proudly. Said Harold. I need to look at it behind these bushes over there. Harold and George wobbled over to the bushes, unbuttoned their coat and switched the two Combinatrons. Then they wobbled back and handled the fake Combinatron 2000 to Mr Sneedley. Everything seems to be in order, said Harold, but before we present the award, we'd like to get a photo of you. Who's we? Asked Mr Sneedley. I'd like to get a photo of you, said Harold nervously. George stuck his hand out of the coat and held up the Forgetchemcallit 2000. Say cheese, said Harold. Mr Sneedley looked down in shock at George's hand. Then George pressed the button. Flash! Suddenly, Mr Sneedley forgot everything that had just happened. Dazed and confused, he stumbled back and rejoined his wife, just in time for the Robo-Boogers to come to life and smash the fake Combinatron 2000. Meanwhile, George and Harold were running with all their might back to the library carrying the real Combinatron 2000. That was so easy, laughed George. Yeah, said Harold, we sure got lucky this time. But when they reached the library door, George and Harold discovered that they hadn't been quite so lucky after all. Chapter 14. Miss Singerbrains. What the heck is going on here? Shouted Miss Singerbrains. I just got back from the restroom and I found a portable potty in my library. Harold, said George, zap her with a forgetcha thingy, quick. Nobody's zapping anybody with anything, shouted Miss Singerbrains. She grabbed the Forgetchemcallit 2000 out of Harold's hands and yanked the Combinatron 2000 out of George's hands. I'm taking these things to the police right now, she said. Maybe they can sort this mess out. Oops. Miss Singerbrains marched downstairs to the parking lot, got in her car and began driving to the police station. Well, said Harold, we'll never catch up to her now. Sure we will, said George. All we need are some wings.